Dr. Sharon Horesh Bergquist. Did I get that right?
You sure did.
Welcome to the show. How you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, I'm so excited to have you. I love the topic of your new book. I'm excited to do a deep dive on all things stress. But I guess let's dive right in. What would you say the biggest misconceptions that people have about stress are, and stress's impact on our health?
I think the biggest misconception is that our stress response is there to harm us. There is so much science in the last 2 decades that is showing how our stress responses are there to help us adapt, to help us survive, and that they serve a purpose in our body that is making us stronger and better able to handle future stress. So the biggest misconception really is that we need to get rid of stress out of our lives, when in reality, we need to optimize it.
Well, how do we parse the subjective experience between distress and eustress, right? Like good stress,
Yes.
stress that's beneficial and productive and adaptive, versus the stress like, I guess, burnout. So many people today are experiencing burnout.
Yeah, and that's really such a critical part of this. So the stress that's predominantly in our lives is chronic stress, and it's continuous. Things like difficult relationships, financial hardship. I mean, that's the predominant form, and there's no question that our bodies were not made for the chronic continuous stress. And over time, it's leading to inflammation, a lot of harm in our body. And, I spent the first half of my career actually talking about the harms of stress and did a lot of work around it. But the biggest feedback I got from people was that they were getting stressed from learning about the harm from stress.
Oh, no.
So, it really called for a different approach. And what our biology is made for, we're designed for brief, intermittent types of stress. These are the stressors that activate processes in our body that help us heal, repair, and rejuvenate. And when you're trying to figure out the difference, am I under kind of this harmful stress, or am I under this beneficial stress? You have to ask yourself the question, how do I feel afterwards? Okay, if you feel exhausted, burnt out, that was not good stress. If you feel energized and motivated, that is good stress.
Wow. Yeah. It's definitely, I mean, what comes to mind for me is a good workout. Is that an example of good stress?
Yes. Yeah. So workouts, especially high intensity, are one of the 5 main hormetic stressors. So the stressors we're talking about, the good stressors, are from the science of hormesis. Hormesis is from the Greek word to excite. And these stressors excite. So exercise is one of them. Eating the phytochemicals in plant food, which work like toxins that stress our body. Eating in a pattern that's time restricted, but with the calories mostly earlier in the day, is another stressor. Heat and cold, and putting ourselves through good, healthy psychological and mental challenges.
Wait, so I just want to double click on something that you said. We should be eating more toxins?
Yeah, so this is a little counterintuitive, and truly, a lot of the science of good stress is a bit counterintuitive, because the idea here is that you're exposing yourself to stress as a method of building stress resilience, right? So it's so counterintuitive, because what we think about is we should be avoiding the stress, right? And this is a different set of tools. It's not that you shouldn't be avoiding certain stressors, just like you shouldn't be avoiding certain foods that are clearly implicated in harm, like the ultra-processed foods. But this is a different set of tools, and it's the other half of what we should be doing, which is strengthening ourselves and making ourselves more resilient. So the plant toxins, the part that maybe is a bit of a head scratcher here is that there are natural toxins and then there are man-made toxins. So there's no disagreement that some of these man-made toxins that, are in the pesticides, et cetera, long list of things. Okay, our bodies don't know what to do with these. But then there are the natural toxins, the phytochemicals. And some of the confusion around them comes from looking at one isolated pathway of how they affect us. Okay, so there's concern about some phytochemicals being anti-nutrients, for example. And they can be, if they're not prepared in the typical way, they can be in people who already have a lot of mineral deficiencies or are eating primarily just grains, for example, as people do in some developed parts of the world. But these plant toxins are a part of this rich history that we have developed with plants over 2 million years. And plants stress our bodies in a beneficial way that makes us stress resistant. So when you look at the totality of how a certain toxin, a plant toxin, the natural phytochemical affects us, you've got to look at the whole part of the pie, right? Anytime you go down one pathway, one mechanism, and you don't look at, first of all, how does that interact with our biology, not just in a lab, right? And how does it affect us in all the myriad of ways when we absorb that food in our body? Overwhelmingly, we benefit because these phytochemicals are activating our body's innate intrinsic ability to ramp up our antioxidant defenses, to increase our mitochondria, to repair proteins, to repair DNA. I mean, we have these incredible gifts in our DNA. And what we need to do, and what recent science has done, is to help us decode how to access our ability to become stronger, right?
Can you give us any examples of some of these so-called plant toxins?
These toxins. So you're probably familiar with a lot of them. You just haven't thought of them as toxins. So resveratrol is extremely well studied in grapes, pistachios, dark chocolate. Allicin, the phytochemical in onions, leeks. There's sulforaphane, which is a really critical one. That's in cruciferous vegetables like broccoli, cabbage, kale, genistein in soy, luteolin, which is in so many fruits and vegetables, ferulic acid, which is in coffee and apples and oranges. There's really a long list. And rather than getting in a superfood mentality of like, you got to eat, this and that, the takeaway really is that we need the diversity of these phytochemicals. Different phytochemicals activate a different series of these stress responses. The more variety and diversity, the more we use our innate intrinsic ability to fight disease, slow aging, and feel better.
So what does that diversity look like on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis?
Yeah, the diversity looks like eating as many different types of plant food, anything from fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, nuts, seeds. And it really involves adding. Again, we're talking about what we can add, not what we can take away. You can have any dietary pattern. You could be omnivore, vegetarian, it doesn't matter. The idea here is if you can add some more plants, you're activating your body's intrinsic ability to fight disease. So it could be different fruits and vegetables in a smoothie. It could be more in a salad, whatever speaks to you. But the problem that is happening across the globe really is that of the 30,000 edible foods, we cultivate around 150, and only 30 of them make it to our plate in a given year, right? So we are removing the stimulus of what our body needs to be its strongest.
Yeah, I mean, from a nutritional standpoint, this hormetic, intersection of fruits and vegetables and how they interact with our bodies, I mean, it makes perfect sense. In terms of volume, I mean, what kind of volume are we talking about? Or is it more about just a range of like a diversity of plants?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both, So obviously getting more of plant food is generally beneficial, but the part that I think, a lot of my patients do this. They say, I eat healthy, and they do because they eat, from whole foods, generally not the ultra processed foods. But this is another level of optimizing diet where you're not just eating the same smoothie with the same fruits and vegetables. You're mixing it up with a different fruit on a different day. You're not eating that same salad that you eat every day for lunch, or the same vegetables that you always have on your plate with dinner with whatever protein you want to have. It's really just that little bit of mixing up. And people generally think of diversity as diversity of fiber for the microbiome. And of course, from the American Gut Project, we have this goal of trying to get 30 or more plant food per week to diversify the gut microbiome. This is to diversify the phytochemicals, and how that also actually benefits the microbiome. Interestingly enough, phytochemicals do select for more beneficial bacteria and less of the harmful. But above and beyond, we're talking about this hormetic benefit on these cellular stress responses that we all have, that have been handed down on a conserved set of genes for over 2 million years, because they are such a huge part of our body's ability to survive and thrive. And it's only been in the last 200 years, with the radical changes in our culture, that we've taken away this stressor that really defines so much of our human history.
And hyper consistency of the kinds of foods that you're eating. I mean, you've talked a bit about the value of, cycling through various fruits and vegetables and trying new things. But aside from that being inherently beneficial, there's also an inherent harm to eating the same thing every day, at least with regards to certain fruits and vegetables, right? Like,
Right.
what comes to mind is spinach, like raw spinach. Like if you're eating a bushel of raw spinach every single morning in your smoothie, you're exposing yourself probably to very high levels of oxalates.
Yeah. And that's so key, Max, because again, we don't want to get into that superfood mentality for so many reasons. But what you're pointing out is that any good stress, when done to an excess, becomes a chronic harmful stress, right? The dose determines the response. We know for example, there are studies on green tea, 1 to 2 cups a day, wonderful benefits. You get to 6 cups a day and you do that for 4 months, there are studies showing liver damage. So I think your point is such a good one, that you want to diversify, because that is the Homo sapiens diet that our genome has adapted to.
What's the best way to incorporate these, maybe some of these plants that contain higher concentrations of these so-called toxins? I know you talk about the value of, for example, spices.
Yes.
Spices being particularly concentrated in these compounds in question.
Yeah, I think the key is to use a food first approach. Our bodies know what to do with food. We have developed mechanisms to rapidly detoxify and eliminate phytotoxins, because over history, the reason plants make these phytochemicals is to make them more stress resistant, to drought, to UV light, and also to us as humans or insects to chomping on them, right? They're natural pesticides. And over our human history, we adapted by rapidly detoxifying and eliminating these toxins from our body. So I think that our bodies know how to handle them, right? And if we can just eat them in a food first way, in the context of the matrix of the food, then I think that we really don't need to worry as much about the harm, because we aren't isolating one compound. For example, if you take the curcumin and you put it in a pill form as a supplement, we don't know what happens to our body when we consume the doses that are in certain supplements. And there is even concern that we can dampen our innate stress resilience and stress response by having too much exogenously. So there is a place for supplements to supplement certain things that we may not get from a pretty healthy diet, but we have to be so intentional about our use of supplements because we can cause harm just as we can benefit.
What about curcumin? That's one of the more common ones.
Yeah.
Found in turmeric.
Yes.
It's thought to have anti-inflammatory,
Yes.
anti-pain effects.
Yeah, and it's just as potent as medicine. I think that's really the key. If you want to get the anti-inflammatory benefit from curcumin, there are studies showing it is just as efficacious as ibuprofen. I mean, power, right? Food is medicine. But again, too much of a good thing would be just like having too much of the NSAID family of medication. And with all these things, we have to find that balance of benefit without the harm.
Yeah, that makes total sense. What do you have to say to carnivore dieters? I mean, I have a lot that follow me because I'm fairly, I would say, amenable to the carnivore community. I'm a big advocate for the consumption of animal source foods and the like, but I disagree with them on the topic of the value of fruits and vegetables for a lot of the same reasons that you're elucidating.
Yeah. Again, this isn't a against meat argument. This is a pro fruit and vegetable argument. And what I would say is that if you want to maximize your body's ability to ramp up these disease defenses, you're handicapping your body by not taking advantage of the abundance of food that you can choose from. So I don't think any of this is an either or argument. I actually hate that it's become that because there are so many ways to eat healthy, and the common bond between all the healthy dietary plans is whole food, right? That can take many forms, and I think as long as we're really avoiding the ultra processed food that our body has just no idea what to do with, I think that there are so many ways to get to health, but you just need the abundance of the fibers, of the phytochemicals. I think there's just no need to deprive your body of this.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I think that animal source foods, animal proteins are wonderful, and they're some of the most nutrient dense foods available to us. But if you are negating these, whether dark leafy greens or berries, I mean, what have you, cruciferous vegetables, I mean, you're leaving a lot on the table.
Yeah.
You're leaving a lot on the table in terms of a real health benefit and a massive body of evidence supporting that.
Yes. No question. I mean, right now in this country, about 1 out of 10 people get the recommended fruits and vegetables. And we know from there are hundreds of studies at this point showing people who get that recommended amount have a 50% lower risk of cancer. It's like, why would you not want to reduce your risk? And these are not just population-based studies. I will say that I've myself have done numerous clinical trials. I've started a teaching kitchen at my institution. I have done a lot of work around food as medicine. We have randomized controlled trials. We did controlled trials. So we're not just saying at a population level your risk is lower. This is really now at the level of controlled trials. Certainly there's mechanistic data, there's population level data, there's empirical data from blue zones. You have to take all these types of clinical studies and get at what your body needs to be optimal.
You're saying we have like causation level data at this point.
We have causation data. Nutrition science gets so heavily critiqued because so much is done through epidemiologic studies, and there's potential for confounding factors. A lot use food frequency questionnaires, which can be very flawed. But we have the randomized controlled trials. So I think that, again, back to what you just said, we know we benefit from these. The debates are, really around things like, how much of X or Y should, you avoid, etc. But I think we're missing the fact that we are so far removed from getting the basics down that these conversations are like at that 1% level. And we're talking about the non-negotiable parts of our physiology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, nutrition nerds like myself, as well as you, I mean, we love to argue in the margins.
Yeah.
But that's not really where population health is happening at this point. Like 60%, if not more, of the calories that your average person consumes today are from vending machine foods, essentially. Right. And that's Absolutely. A big problem.
Yeah, 100%. And I think the biggest thing that we should all focus on is get the basics down, right? Get what your body thrives on and needs. No supplement, no little tiny tweak is ever going to move the needle towards health. So we've got to just get these basics down.
I agree. So food can be medicine, as we've discussed, but also not food can be another form of medicine. Not eating.
That's right.
Talk to me about fasting.
Yeah. So food is so complex because it's not just the nutrients in the food. It is when you eat the food and of course also who you eat it with, which is like another level of interesting part of how food benefits us. But the timing of when you eat, the chronobiology, is such an important part. Our body has this natural rhythm where in the daytime we are programmed to be active, to think, to eat, to metabolize. And at nighttime when we sleep, we are programmed to rest, repair, rejuvenate. There's a natural rhythm of stress, which is the period of not eating, and recovery, which is the period when we get the nutrients. When we are out of balance, we throw this natural rhythm off. Growth may sound good, right? You eat, you grow, your cells grow. But growth without repair throws that balance off. And when we eat in more than 12 hours in a given day, and the average American now eats in 15 hours, we are not giving our body the time it needs to do housekeeping functions, repair DNA and protein, do a process of recycling through autophagy to take out all the damage we have incurred throughout the day, right? So if you were running a coffee shop and in the morning you turn on the lights, you get the coffee ready, you are ready for the customers, they come through, and by nighttime you need to start mopping and cleaning and stocking up your shelves to get ready for the next day. When we are eating in the evening or we're not giving our bodies that 12 hours or more of fasting, we aren't giving our bodies the time to prepare for that next day, right? So then you go into that next day and, there's stores in disarray and you're really not going to be efficient for business that day. And that's what we're doing day after day. We're reducing the efficiency of our body because we're not giving it the time to repair during, we're calling it fasting, but I'm going to call it normal eating. And we need to create this balance for this recycling, but also to maintain our circadian biology. Our rhythm of when our body is optimized to break down food. So there's two parts to this. You want to eat in a 12 or less hour window, but you want your food to be front loaded, most of the calories earlier in the day, because our insulin levels go down later on in the day. Melatonin actually opposes the action of insulin. So the same food eaten later in the day is going to have more of a spike in glucose and insulin, more disarray on our metabolic health. And that plays out in epidemiologic studies where people followed over years. There's one study that followed people over 8 years, and people who ate heavy dinners, most of their calories at dinner or later, In men, there was a 2-fold increase in obesity. In women, a 3-fold increase. We are simply not made to disrupt this natural rhythm between growth and repair. And I think when we do, our bodies just protest.
Is this sometimes referred to as time-restricted feeding?
It is. Yeah, it's time-restricted eating. It's time-restricted feeding when they're animal studies. It's time-restricted eating when it's humans. But this is the idea here. I want to get away from this being called a form of intermittent fasting because people immediately start to think of deprivation. And the message that I think we need to take away is that we are restoring what is normal, right? This whole idea of introducing stress seems radical, but what's radical is the way we are living today. What's radical is the way we're accepting chronic disease. And, Max, if I were to design a clinical trial and I said, look, I'm going to have one arm of that study randomized to a group that's going to eat when they want, whatever they want. And the control group is going to be this time-restricted eating group. And over time, that study started to detect that the group that was randomized to eating around the clock was developing rampant rates of chronic disease. They were dying early, whether they were young, they were old. There is no institutional review board that would ethically allow me to continue this study. But that is what we are doing every day. So I think we need to really reframe what we're considering radical here.
We've inherited a food supply that is mostly ultra processed, and the modern world has essentially become a buffet of those foods available 24 hours a day. What did you say, 15 hours a day we're eating? Your average adult
and
stuffing their face 15 hours a day.
First calorie is that juice or cream in the coffee in the morning, ending with the snack before bed because, oh boy, we just can't go overnight without eating, without that snack. This is just wreaking havoc on our physiology.
Yeah, that is dysfunctional. That is, especially when you zoom out and you try to conceive of what life was like for the vast majority of our time on this planet. I mean, we didn't have access to food 24 hours a day.
Right. And that is the key here because our lives, really since the Industrial Revolution is when there was the rapid change in our lifestyle. And some of it started obviously 10,000 years ago with the advent of agriculture. It's just accelerated since the Industrial Revolution. But our hunter-gatherer ancestors went long periods without eating. They had to, whether they're old or young, they had to have intervals of high-intensity exercise. They were either running away from a predator or they were hunting prey. They had to be exposed to heat and cold. They lived in impermanent shelters. They had to go through periods where they had to push themselves beyond the horizon, learn how to use new tools. I mean, this is what made our species the one that survived and outdid other species. And yet we have removed these stressors to which our physiology has adapted and has come to depend on to make us stress resistant. And most often when people think about what we've introduced into our lives, this typical mismatch theory is that we are mismatched for the ultra-processed food, the sedentary lifestyle, the loneliness epidemic, and we certainly are. What is overlooked is that there's a mismatch of what we've removed from the fabric of our lives, right? We have removed these good stressors. And because they're not seen, they're discounted as the importance that they play. And the whole premise of this paradox is that the lack of good stress is a risk factor. It is probably the biggest risk factor that's overlooked for the way that we're feeling today, all the mental fog, the digestive problems, the chronic disease, the premature mortality, because all of this is converging at the level of our cells. When we stress ourselves mildly, and hormetic stressors are mild to moderate, followed by recovery, we are making our cells healthier. And our cells are the furthest upstream you can go, because that is the foundational building block of our body. For decades, I have been practicing root cause medicine because I'm an internal medicine physician. So much of my practice, my research is how do we build health from the foundational level up? And making our cells healthy is a systems biology foundational way, which makes these good stressors the biggest levers that we could possibly be pulling to optimize our health.
So eloquently put. What does health mean to you?
Health, there's a day-to-day experience of health, and then there's what is happening in your body. So I will start off by what is happening in your body, because I think that will help inform understanding the symptoms that follow. So in our body, we have a natural balance called homeostasis. And it's really the wisdom of our body, and it speaks to how brilliant our design is. When we are in a homeostatic balance, we are in a healthy state. When that balance is disrupted, our body is trying so hard to reestablish that balance. We have these feedback mechanisms that kick in, and there are so many, and they are overlapping because it's so fundamental to our existence for us to restore that balance. Some of the ways we are living in modern life, the things that we're talking about that are typical of the Western lifestyle, they are throwing our body out of that homeostatic balance. So they're leading to wear and tear and inflammation. Good stressors are doing the opposite. They are helping us reset a resilient set point, kind of reestablish balance where we are netting benefit. So this is such a key. It's like looking at your cells like a bank account, and for health, you want the biggest bank account. The stressors that are harmful, this Western lifestyle, you're making withdrawals out of your bank account. When you are taking on good stress, you're making deposits. Okay, so there are two different approaches to health, and so much of the focus is on how do we stop making these withdrawals? How do we avoid the harms? And we are not having this bigger conversation of how can we become stronger? How can we empower ourselves? And it's such a different mindset, right? It's of abundance and growth and self-empowerment as opposed to one of fear and restriction, right? Like that we need to, we're not, like we are tough. Like humans are designed to be tough. We just have to activate that. So health is essentially a big bank account, right?
And so many of us are living paycheck to paycheck.
Yeah.
Literally today as well as metaphorically.
100%. And so back to then how do you feel? When you are making withdrawals out of your bank account, you will start with having symptoms. Anything from mental fogginess to my digestion doesn't feel right to menstrual irregularity. Something feels off. And this is what Western medicine is not good at. And again, I've been practicing Western medicine for 25 years, and I can say that there's a lot of good. I mean, I have colleagues that do amazing surgeries and work, but things like, disrupting balance and these symptoms, we simply aren't good at approaching. But if we don't address what our body is telling us when we feel these symptoms, over time, they become the chronic disease. And if we don't listen then they become early death. So that's what's happening physiologically. And the same pathways that lead to health, or when they're not honored, lead to disease, are the same ones that control the biology of our aging process.
Well, let's home in for a bit on intermittent fasting or time-restricted eating,
Yeah.
which is where we began. What does the clinical data say about, the benefits that one might incur from front-loading their day with food and then tapering off by the end of the day?
Yeah, so when you front load, we know that you can restore metabolic health. This is such a foundational piece of our overall health, because when our metabolism is compromised and our mitochondria are impaired, that leads to cardiometabolic changes like heart disease, dementia, cancer, etc. So when you're eating earlier in the day, you are aligning your eating with your day-night cycle. So we have a circadian rhythm, which is kind of a diurnal pattern where our bodies are optimized for certain functions earlier, as we said, and then others later in the evening. The signal is driven by a master regulator, the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is about 20,000 neurons in your hypothalamus. When your body, your retina sees daylight, it sends a signal of daytime, and of darkness, your body gets a signal to wind down. And for a long time, we thought that our circadian biology was primarily driven by this master regulator of our day-night cycle. But over it's a little over a decade now, we have discovered that there are peripheral clocks. Every organ system, every cell of our body has a clock. Our digestive system, our gut microbiome. And these peripheral clocks are entrained by when we eat. If we eat later in the day when our master regulator is trying to wind down, what we're doing is sending confusing messages inside our body. Because one clock is trying to close shop, the other clock is saying, oh, turn on the lights. So we're jet lagging our body essentially. And what our natural rhythm really wants, what our circadian biology wants, is to be reinforced. And if there's conflicting messages from these clocks, we are dampening the oscillations in our circadian rhythm. So all these functions of digestion become impaired or compromised. Your cognitive capacity, we're optimized to think better early morning into like the early part of the afternoon. But you are compromising the efficiency of your body. That affects every single function, task, and cell in your body.
Now, how might chronically doing that, eating 15 hours a day like most Americans, how might that show up on your annual physical, say?
Yeah, so on an annual physical, probably, body mass index can be an indicator. It's not my favorite because it just sometimes misses the boat in terms of body composition and metabolic health.
Of course.
Waist circumference would also be a very quick, indirect way, but really lab panels, I find that looking for insulin resistance, I do fasting insulin and fasting glucose using the homeostatic model assessment for insulin resistance, the HOMA-IR equation, which improves the sensitivity of being able to find insulin resistance. That is roughly comparable to the euglycemic clamp index method that's used in clinical studies. So that's one of the better ways of catching insulin resistance at an earlier state. What happens a lot right now is we rely on markers like blood sugar or hemoglobin A1C, which is a 3-month average of blood sugar. And the problem with that is when the body enters a state of insulin resistance, our bodies are so smart, we make more insulin to compensate. So in that process, we keep blood sugar normal. by the time a person has diabetes, they have lost 50% of the pancreatic islet cells that make insulin. Those cells are burnt out. So what we're diagnosing as the start of diabetes, the start of prediabetes, is such a late stage in this whole process of chronic disease. And we need these earlier markers to tell us that what we are doing is putting us on this train. And none of these stops are good, but we have so many points where we can get off this train. And what we know is that this ability to reverse our path is like one we haven't ever thought was even imaginable. But our human capacity to redirect this is huge, because insulin resistance is not a disease. It is our body responding normally to the conditions under which we are putting it. So the problem is the lifestyle, the condition that we are making our bodies respond to, right? We're developing insulin resistance because our body is in a state of excess, of energy excess, and it protects itself by becoming insulin resistant to fat being in locations where breaking it down creates lipotoxicity to that cell. If you change the lifestyle, you balance out the energy intake, you balance the types of food, the body goes in rewind. It removes the fat out of the liver and the fatty liver. It starts to correct. And I'll tell you, Max, the beauty of doing primary care is I've had the same patients for 25 years. So you get to see longitudinally what happens when you make any intervention. And within like less than 3 months, I have seen patients make dramatic reversals in metabolic dysfunction, insulin resistance, lipids, cardiometabolic risk, inflammation. All we have to do is give our body the right inputs.
It's amazing. Well, your patients are lucky to have you. You brought up the concept of energy toxicity, energy balance. So some critics of intermittent fasting will argue, even within the evidence-based community, in fact, I would say particularly within the evidence-based community, will say that it ultimately all comes down to energy balance. Like, it doesn't really matter how you orient your food intake over the course of the day. If you're eating more than you're burning every day, you're going to store fat, and over time, that's going to drive insulin resistance. So they often discount the value of, a tool like time-restricted eating. So how do you address that?
Yeah, I think it depends on what you are measuring. So if you are solely looking at weight management, well, sure. You can either, restrict nutrients, you can restrict the energy, you can kind of play around with certain variables. And there probably isn't a huge difference in how you get to the end point when you are primarily looking at body composition and weight. What I'm talking about is what is happening at the cellular level. So if you look at clinical studies with fasting, but look at what happens in a group that, gets the same number of calories, but does it in a time-restricted way, at a cellular level, you see higher oxidative capacity. You see better insulin sensitivity. So I'm really saying that, we've got to look at this in a broader way of what are the outputs for chronic disease, not just weight and body composition. So I think we've got to balance this repair with the growth. And this is so much beyond the argument of, is this the best weight loss method? So much comes down to, is this the optimal weight loss? That is not the goal I am talking about. I am talking about being thriving, healthy individuals that enjoy a high quality of life and age well into the future.
Okay, well, so we've touched on these plant toxins. We've touched on time-restricted eating, intermittent fasting, and in your book, you offer 3 more sort of key stressors that you claim can optimize health, which and I'm familiar with some of them. I think it's brilliant work that you've done. But for somebody listening to this who's maybe overweight, who their blood sugar isn't where they want it to be, maybe they've got high blood pressure. I mean, so many adults today struggle with, components of metabolic syndrome, whether it's too much visceral fat or hypertension, which we know is really harmful. Where is one to begin?
Yeah.
Like, there's so much information today, right? It's so
Right.
easy to get overwhelmed by all this. So where's one to start?
Yeah, the beauty is you can start in so many places, right? And you don't have to make a radical change to start seeing a big result. You can start with the things we're talking about now, like add one more fruit or vegetable, add a little bit of high intensity, little incremental changes just to give you a sense of the magnitude of impact. There's a study done on vigorous intermittent lifestyle physical activity, essentially little spurts, 1 to 2 minutes, 3 times a day of hitting high intensity. So running up a flight of stairs, running to catch a bus, just doing that amounted to a 50% reduction in cardiovascular mortality, a 40% reduction in all-cause mortality over time. So the biggest concept to embrace is make a small change, but do it consistently, because no single thing is the answer, right? It's all about consistency and synergy between the different components of our lifestyle. So you can add a plant food, you can run up a flight of stairs to get a short, brief burst of some vigorous activity. You can do that with heat and cold. At the end of a shower, 30 seconds of cold. You can take a hot bath at night between 102 to 104 degrees, and that activates some stress resilience. You can end eating 2 to 3 hours before bed. The idea really is that you have a lot of tools to work with. There is not one path to becoming healthier. And we have focused so much, again, on this restriction and removal, but you can essentially mitigate a lot of the harm that's already happened. And I think this is really a message of empowerment, of hope and freedom. And I have seen this turn around the lives of so many people that are struggling and suffering. Like the example you gave, most of my practice is people with metabolic disease. I take care of, a cross-section of America. I mean, this is the bread and butter of primary care. But the answers are there. They're hidden in plain sight. We just have to accept and do them. And they're accessible to every one of us, because our ability to heal is the gift in our DNA. We all have this ability. This isn't a message of be tough or go strong and persevere. This is a message that you've got this. This is in your hardwiring. This is what makes you human. I can do it. You can do it. Anybody listening can do this.
It's your birthright. And you practice in Atlanta, do you not?
I sure do.
I mean, shout out Atlanta. I've only been a handful of times. Every time I've been, it's been a lovely experience. But if I recall correctly, Atlanta charts pretty high on the country's obesity charts, does it not?
Yeah. Yes, the entire Southern Belt just tracks very high. So yes, we are a little bit in a different place with availability of good, quick options for health food. And there are a lot of traditional foods in the South that are not the healthiest choices.
But I love barbecue.
Yes.
Love Southern barbecue.
Oh, they're tasty. I don't argue that.
And collard greens and what else? Okra, pickled okra. Is that a Southern thing? I don't know. I know fried okra.
Fried okra.
Yeah. I'm a big
fried
fan.
Everything.
Fried pretty much everything. Yeah. If I recall correctly, it was really hard to find healthy food, but
Yes.
I've gotten pretty good because I travel a lot at catering my environment to my needs. With regards to, because I know that you're also a researcher, which I think
Yes.
is so exciting. What do you see coming down the pike in terms of this sort of stress related research and how it might be harnessed and exploited to better our lives?
Yeah, I will. Well, I'll start off by, I can share one of the studies that we've done. This was a study looking at psychological stress. We've talked a lot about physical stressors here with the foods, the exercise piece, but psychological stress works very similarly depending on the kind of stress. So I take care of a group of individuals that are senior level executives in one of my clinical practices. They're CEOs of companies, a group that generally lives under a lot of stress, but it's also a group that thrives on a lot of the work that they do, and they find it incredibly meaningful. And a question that I had that led to the study is that stress harmful or beneficial, right? Because they are so energized and motivated by the work that they do. And the outcome that we looked at was measuring their different stress levels. We did this through some validated questionnaires. We looked at their resilience through some validated questionnaires. And we looked at their biological age, which many people listening to your podcast are familiar with, but it's based on epigenetic changes to our DNA. So changes triggered by our environment and exposures over time. And the kind of current state is incredible in medicine, where with one tube of blood, we can do microarrays that can look at 950,000 sites in our genome of epigenetic changes.
Wow.
One tube of blood. We use machine learning algorithms to impute a biological age. And we went into this study with this hypothesis that people with high stress are going to be aging faster. And gee, if you could keep your stress down, you're going to slow the aging. And what we found that was just incredible is in the group that had low resilience, people who had low stress were aging at a faster biological rate than people who had like a moderate amount that tracked about comparable to the average in America. And this was really a hormetic relationship where a mild to moderate amount of stress is health promoting. So I think that we're going to start looking for relationships between stress and our biology that aren't just linear. So we've always just pictured our relationship as the higher the dose, the more the harm. And so the goal of stress management has been, well, if we can just bring that stress down, we can get it to the point where it's not harming, where linearly we are kind of in a safe zone. But the science of hormesis is showing that the relationship is not linear. It's actually shaped like an upside down U, where too much is harmful, not enough is just as harmful. But when you are in this hormetic or Goldilocks zone, you are at this peak of that inverted U where your body takes off, where we become stronger. We grow pathways that strengthen every part of us. Our brain creates networks like synaptic networks. Our muscles become stronger under stress. Our heart becomes stronger under stress. So we want to live in this sweet spot. And a lot of the benefits of stress have been missed because the models looked to find the outcome have been linear models. And when they have been kind of shaped in a pattern of hormetic relationship, we're seeing that, oh goodness, we were averaging the effect across a population, but we were missing the sweet spot of the benefit of stress. So I think we're going to analyze data with that understanding to get a better sense of the hormetic benefit. And there are currently over 100,000 studies showing hormetic benefits or hormesis. So it's an new science, but it's actually an old science. And it's just getting the attention because it's been applied in different fields like toxicology and agriculture. And it is now entering the space of public health and medicine.
So, okay, let me see if I could synthesize everything you've just downloaded to us. So basically, like, as a principle, hormesis seems to be really like a positive thing, but it's a very low resolution principle at this point. And like most things in biology, it's not, and with human health, it's not one size fits all.
Yeah.
So it's going to differ from person to person based on the degree of resilience that they possess.
It's the person's resilience factors in here because the goal is just to push yourself a little bit outside your comfort zone. If a person is starting at a state where they have low resilience, then that's going to look very different than another person. And
somebody with high resilience.
Exactly. And the other part is the recovery, right? If the same person has not adequately recovered, it's going to take less to push them outside their comfort zone the next day. So the barometer is really just pushed to where it's a little uncomfortable, but not overwhelming. Follow that with recovery because it's during stress that your body increases its efficiency, turns on these housekeeping functions. The recovery is when we literally rewire and reconfigure our bodies so that we can handle that stress better when we're exposed to it in the future.
So important. And yeah, such a great concept to underscore that, like what is sufficiently stressful for me to stimulate an adaptive response is going to be different for every single person listening to this.
Yes. And the irony is the people who need it the most, it's the hardest for. Yeah, because our body works through bioplasticity. It's essentially use it or lose it. If a person has, for example, gotten used to eating plant food, well, their ability to digest that plant food, their gut microbiome is so different, they can probably handle more of the plant food. If a person hasn't and they've restricted plant food and they start to introduce it, well, they can't do too much at once because their gut microbiome isn't prepared to break down the food. They don't have the right mix of gut bacteria. So this is just like going to the gym and lifting weights and building muscle. You've got to really do what level your body is ready for. And over time, you are going to build the strength and the resistance. I think it's this bioplasticity. And the corollary, though, is if you don't, you lose this resilience. You become more vulnerable to the mental and physical illnesses that are rampant in this country. So this is really a call to action of seeking what makes you stronger. And we spend, a lot of time wishing things were easier. And my gosh, I do the same. But let's shift our focus on how can we become stronger.
Got to get out of your comfort zone.
Yeah.
Yeah. I notice when I'm, there are phases when I'm eating. There are certainly phases when I'm eating 15 hours a day.
Yeah.
And I notice that when I'm in one of those sort of modes, trying to taper off my late night food consumption, it's not very pleasant because I'm just used to eating all day long.
Right.
And sometimes it's for social reasons, so I'm not going to forego those.
Right.
But yeah, I've noticed that also with sauna use. That there have been phases in my life where I've had regular access to very hot saunas, and I build up like a resilience, like a tolerance to it. And it's very easy for me to sit in a sauna for 20 minutes, even if the sauna is 200 degrees Fahrenheit, which is very hot. And then if I take a break, it's a lot more difficult. It's like inertia, right? It's like a body in motion wants to stay in motion, and a body at rest wants to. I know damn well a body at rest wants to stay at rest. So it's just It's kind of interesting to think about. It just shows you how dynamic things can be and how difficult it can be to change. But it's worth the changing. If you want to change, you've got to change.
And I'm glad you're acknowledging that this is hard. And what's making it hard is because the easy choice for us right now is the unhealthy choice, right? So we are really having to go counterculture. And that is really part of that uphill battle. The beauty of good stress, though, is that you are enforcing the natural rhythm of your body. Our bodies are so adapted to this that you're working with your body rather than trying to work against it. So this pattern of stress recovery is actually easier for us to maintain than chronic continuous habit change, because you and I and every human, as part of being human, is not built to chronically resist fat, sugar, and salt, chronically resist sedentary. Our bodies really have adapted to, this ping of the dopamine, right? We are adapted to wanting to conserve calories. It's in our nature to seek these things. So when we're fighting them, it is a very difficult thing to do unless you structure a micro environment that makes it easier, that makes that default choice the healthy choice. Adding these good stressors, though, takes a little bit of that barrier out, because this is what our ancestors did for our human history. Our story as humans is encountering stress. It's a story of stress. So I think it's just a different set of tools that you can work with, but they do align with our physiology, which will hopefully make some of these kind of big hurdles that we have to fight to be healthy a little bit easier.
I love it. Well, thanks so much for coming out and sharing your research with us. I mean, this is a topic that I think is endlessly fascinating, and I do my best day to day to step regularly outside of my comfort zone, and the boundaries of that zone changes almost on a daily basis.
Yes.
But nonetheless, it's always worth it. It's always worth it to challenge yourself.
Yeah.
Like, I've never regretted a workout, even on those days where it almost took an insurmountable amount of effort to get me into the gym. I've never regretted going. I've never regretted the sauna session. I've never regretted the cold plunge. But yeah, it can be a challenge to will yourself to do those things, of course.
Yeah.
Especially when you're busy. I don't have kids, but I would imagine if you've got screaming kids running around, if you've got a full-time crazy desk job. But I appreciate your advocacy on behalf of these interventions. I think super, super important.
Thank you. Yeah, I believe every one of us has limitless potential to live a better life. And I think that this is the pathway of getting there. Like you said, you won't regret it once you do it, but we all have this ability. There's nothing special about like you or I doing this. We all have this limitless potential, and this is getting uncomfortable in the service of reaching our highest good.
Amen. Well, I've got just one last question for you before we get to that. Where can people pick up the book, The Stress Paradox, and where can they connect with you on social media?
So you can learn more about the book and find links to getting it from my website, drsharonberquist.com. On social media, on Instagram, I am the Good Stress Doctor. On LinkedIn, I'm Dr. Sharon Horesh Bergquist. And I hope we can start a good stress revolution.
Amen. Hear, hear. Well, Dr. Bergquist, last question that everybody gets asked on the show. What does living a genius life mean to you?
For me, Max, a genius life is using my talents to create this greater good, to challenge myself to get uncomfortable in the service of helping other people reach their maximum potential. And that to me is why I'm here, and I think we're all here to be part of something bigger than ourselves.
Love it. Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, thanks again for coming out.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you guys for listening. Share this episode with friends and loved ones. Pick up the stress paradox, and I will catch you on the next episode. Peace. Hey, if you liked that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.